All right, thank you. Is everyone having fun so far? Yeah, awesome. Thanks to Hamish and the rest of the Mechanical Rock crew and all the other sponsors and everyone that helped out. From organising D2D Perth, I know how much effort it is to put one of these together, so it's awesome to have another, conference in Perth. We don't get as much love as the eastern states, so it's always good. So today, I'm going to be talking to you about Devops and continuous delivery, and I guess in a lot of ways this talk's probably going to be fairly basic, so maybe if you've been doing this stuff for a long time, maybe just sit back and relax and enjoy the comedy of the very likely demo gods like just crushing me, basically. Oh, speaking of which, oh no, good, I am joined on my hotspot, cool. My computer badly needs a restart, so there's going to be some awkward waits in this one, I think. Anyway, let's dive in. So, I guess to start off, the tooling that we get as developers, every year is just getting better and better and better, and that's, as a developer, that's really exciting. For instance, I can go into Visual Studio, I can create a new .NET Core project, let's call it latency conf site. So I can start with nothing. Let's do an MVC one. This is one of those awkward waits where, my computer's just really slow at the moment. Serves me right for not formatting it. Probably doesn't help I have ReSharper as well. So, we can start off with a brand new website. It's just the basic standard boilerplate, so I'll just run it up so we can make sure that it's actually working and intact. Chug, chug, chug. Cool. So, basic website. It's got 3 pages. They're all static content. Nothing too crazy going on here. But the cool thing is, as a developer, I can go into Visual Studio, and I'm actually going to zoom in a bit so you can, whoa, hello. That's a bit crazy, isn't it? Oh, you can kind of still see it. I can go into Visual Studio, I can right-click on the project and go to Publish. And I can, in this case, just publish it to an Azure app service, otherwise known as Web Apps. I can actually create a new one from inside of Visual Studio. This is where we cross our fingers for the demo gods. Without leaving Visual Studio, I can create a whole new website that's in the cloud and then publish my site to it. So while we wait for the slow internet thing, there we go, yeah, that's good. Let's create a new resource group. Latency comp site. And we'll create a new app service plan. Come on. Put this one in Southeast Asia and Singapore, and then we can choose what type of machine we want. We'll just choose a basic one because it's the cheapest. And then we wait for the slow internet thing. Come on. Anytime now. There we go. Okay. Cool. And then we hit create. Sweet. So there we go. Deployed to the cloud. Yay! So job done. I'm going to go now because we can just ship that to prod. And but actually, hang on. What if I forget to set it to release mode before pushing it up, or I forget to put the production database connection string in the web config file, or I'm actually on a release branch because I forgot to switch to master, and so I'm pushing up some random code to prod, or maybe I am on master, but I forgot to pull the latest changes, and so I don't have a critical bug fix that someone just pushed up, or I accidentally just pushed out application B rather than application A, and we all know that you have to deploy them the other way around because otherwise it breaks all of the web servers. All of these things are things that I have seen and frankly probably done all of them, right? Every time that you leave something like this to, I guess a manual sort of process, a human process, you've got the chance of human error. And the process of deploying something is something that is fundamentally, the same thing that you're doing. It's a repetitive action. And when you start looking at all of the theory around continuous delivery and DevOps and all of that sort of thing, there's a lot of stuff saying, something that's repetitive you should be automating, and something that's hard, like deploying something to production, you should, rather than doing it less often, do it more often. anymore. Ooh. So what I'm going to do instead is run us through the other side of the developer tooling that we get now, which is all of the tooling that makes it so much easier and faster for us to actually put that automation in. So let's start off with Visual Studio Team Services. Here we go. Hopefully you can see that the screen's a bit dull, but we're just going to create a new project. And we'll call it latency comp site again when it loads. Cool, create. Now, in VSTS, then I get a Git repository and work item tracking and a build and deployment thing. So we're going to start exploring that and see what we can do in a very short period of time. Chug, chug, chug. Okay. So first thing is, great, I've got the URL here for the Git repository, so I can just create a new repository, and once I set up my details, we can commit all the files. Oh, before I do that, I need a git ignore and git attributes file. Otherwise it's gross. Refresh, much better. Cool, so initial commit. And then we can just push that up to the STS, but I need to add the remote first. Oh, hello. Copy that again. Great, so push to master, set upstream. Awesome. So, pushing the code up to VSTS from our local machine. And actually, one thing before I forget, let's make a small change to this code so that we know when we deploy with a pipeline that it actually deployed. So in the footer of the site, we'll just add something. Where's the footer? There we go. High latency conference. Cool. So I'll commit and push that. Cool. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to create a CI build for it. I'm assuming most people, does anyone not know what continuous integration is? Good, very good. So if I refresh this, now this is where some of the nice stuff that we get in some of the more later developer tooling helps us. I clicked create in that. In this case, it's an ASP.NET Core project, so I can do that. I need to select which agent I want. In this case, I'm just going to say, give me a VS 2017 one. And the one other thing I need to do is just set up the trigger so that every time someone pushes to master, it automatically builds. And so at this point, I can save the build and queue it, which is going to create or kick off a build there. And this is going to start building the software. Now, going from nothing to having my code in a Git repository in the cloud with a CI pipeline, building it, and if I had tests in there, it would actually run tests as well, is pretty cool. And it's already putting some stuff in there that's going to help me meet some of the best practices around continuous delivery, like build your binaries once and deploy them everywhere, because it actually publishes the binaries as an artifact of the build, which, as you'll see in a bit, we're going to chain off into the release. Now, while we're waiting for this to build, it's worth pointing out that whilst I'm using VSTS and Azure and Visual Studio, the same things apply to all of the tooling out there. You look at things like TeamCity and AppVeyor and Bamboo and Octopus Deploy and Circle CI. There's so many of them out there, and all of them are just iterating on making this experience faster and better and easier. And I guess the point would be that we're about to get to, once we actually get the deployment bit going, which we might start doing now, is that going from, sure, right-click publish is really easy. It's actually a really great feature that I find particularly useful when doing proof of concepts. But whenever you're doing something real that you want to put into production, it's actually not that much effort to do that in an automated way and get started with a basic deployment pipeline like we are here. So in this case, for the release of the code that we just built, I want to put it in Azure App Service, so I'm going to hit that one. Now it's automatic. I might zoom out, I guess. It's a bit hard to see. So, so we're going to create a dev environment to start with. It automatically sets it up as automatically building as soon as there's an artifact. I need to add the artifact from the other build, which this automatically picks up for me. And that's pretty much it. Oh no, there is one other thing. So in the tasks, there's basically, I need to select which Azure subscription and which app service I'm deploying to. So if I do this, I can select. Can the people at back read it? Yeah, nice, okay, that's good. Just yell out if you can't, I'll bump the font size. All right, there we go, slow internet. So Visual Studio Ultimate, I hit authorize. This is going to put me through an OAuth dance to log in and authorize the CI server that it's allowed to deploy into my Azure subscription. Cool, and then when that goes, like I say, there's some awkward kind of waiting bits in this. There we go, all right, cool. And then I should, when this loads, be able to select the site that we just created in Visual Studio. So we called it latency comp site. You can see I've been playing around with this the last few days. And that is everything. What's it doing there? There we go. That's everything I need to do. So I can actually save this now. And when it sorts itself out, come on. There we go, cool. So now I can create a release. And that will automatically grab the build output of the build that we triggered when we created the continuous integration pipeline and just deploy it into that latency conf site Azure app service that we created from Visual Studio. So again, another awkward wait here, but while we do that, what we're going to have after this is our first basic continuous delivery pipeline. It automatically, every time we push to master, and that might be through a pull request, which is usually the sort of thing that, that I would put in place for teams that I'm working with, because then you get automatic code reviews from people. And if you want to go really fancy, you can start building the pull requests in your continuous integration so that when you merge them, you know that they're going to be green. And it takes the output from that, it runs any tests that are in there. This one doesn't have any yet. And it puts it into this here, and then we deploy automatically into our dev environment, which you can see down here that it just did. And so, if it all worked, if I refresh this, bump this up as well. So you can see here there's nothing in the footer. If I refresh, the footer should now have our new message. There we go, cool. So we're awesome, we're done, that's it. That's our first continuous delivery pipeline, and that's a reasonable continuous delivery pipeline. Now, from here, the great thing is there's so many other things that you can start adding to your pipeline. You can add in versioning, and there's an excellent tool that I highly recommend that you look into called Git Version. One of the core contributors of that is a guy called Jake Ginnivan, who a lot of you probably know because he's around the place a lot at conferences like this. I'm not sure why he isn't here today. I'll have to give him crap for that later. You can add in your automated tests. You can do things like static code analysis. You can do infrastructure provisioning so that you don't have to manually create the infrastructure in Visual Studio or in the Azure portal or AWS portal or whatever it is. You can add automatic security scanning. and vulnerability scanning. You can add automated UI testing. You can add multiple environments and start promoting them through from dev all the way to production. You can add configuration management and secret management, so you don't need to remember to change the database connection string, it does it for you. You can add integration with your monitoring tools so that they know about a deployment that you might do. If this is still working, ignore that, good. This is something called Azure App Insights, which is a analytics monitoring type service that you can pump statistics into. And when I was playing with this the other day, I added a step in the release pipeline to add a release annotation. So you can see here, I can see that, hey, there was a release here and my page load time went up. Something in that release might have caused that. You start getting more interesting information within which you can support and understand your applications in production. You can also add things like database migration, so you can start taking control of your database in an automated way and not doing that manually as well. So what we might do, just to demonstrate that, one of the things I suppose that I want everyone to take away from this is it's not a lot of work to get started. We just, in about 10 minutes, we created a full pipeline that works now. Every time I push to master, it's going to deploy that thing through to dev after making sure that it compiles and the tests run and all that sort of thing. So I guess the two takeaways would be, firstly, there's no excuse to not do this stuff because it's so easy these days. And secondly, you can make your deployment pipeline sophisticated, but you can start small like this, and then we can slowly add things on. And each thing that you add takes a little bit of time, and over a longer period of time, if you're continuously improving it, as you should be with pretty much everything that you're doing as a team, in following the agile kind of practices and mindset, then you'll end up with some pretty sophisticated things, and there certainly are very sophisticated patterns out there around things like canary testing and blue-green deployments and all kinds of interesting things. So I'm going to do, just to demonstrate how you can, I guess, continuously evolve your pipeline, I'm going to add one extra thing to this pipeline, which is, well, it's kind of two extra things. It's automated infrastructure provisioning, and I'm also going to add a production environment. So to start with, I guess, again, in the vein of demonstrating the tooling these days, I'm going to create the script that, I guess, defines the infrastructure from, where is it? It should be in there, right? Did I put it in the wrong place? Latency comp site. This is messing with me. Okay, that's somewhat confusing. Okay, it must be in a different subscription. Anyway, what I can do, so I'll show you what I was going to do anyway. So I can go into one of the websites. I can go down to chug. Gee, the internet's a bit sad, isn't it? There's an option in there called automation script that will automatically output a script that describes the infrastructure. At this point, there we go. I'm going to basically use one that I prepared earlier, but essentially you can see it here. Yeah, cool. So it's a bit hard to see, but it basically creates a bunch of JSON that declaratively describes the infrastructure here, which in this case is pretty simple. It's just a website and a server farm that the website sits on. So what I'm going to do, to save a bit of time, is grab one of the ones I was doing the other day, which probably, that one maybe? Yeah, cool. And I'm going to put them in here. Okay, so basically, to explain these, this is using something called Azure Resource Manager, ARM, but the same thing applies to AWS CloudFormation and a bunch of other ones that all the different, these sorts of platforms have. Some of them are JSON, some of them are YAML. At the end of the day, they do the same sort of thing. They're declaratively describing what your infrastructure is, and when you apply them, they idempotently get applied to whatever the latest version needs to be. In this case, there's one parameter that I've created called site name, and I use that as the name of the website and the name of the hosting server and the name of the resource group. In here, I've got a bunch of, so I've got the server farm with the basic configuration in Southeast Asia, and I've got my website with my site name. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in here as well. But there's one thing I want to get rid of, which is that one, because otherwise it's going to die. Cool. So what I'm going to do is commit that. So these are just stored in the source control next to the website. You can do it in a separate repository if you want to, and there's some pros and cons to both of those we can talk about in a bit. But what we're going to do, before I commit that, is we're going to go back to our CI pipeline. Nice. And so what we're going to do here is we need to add one extra task. Oh, hello. Finally. Cool. It's really slowed down. That's really frustrating. All right, edit. So we've got those two JSON files in our source control. What I need to do is add them to the build artifact that gets lifted out of the CI, so that when we push it into the release pipeline, that those files are available to be used. So in this case, I can do a pretty simple file copy task. I just need to make sure it's before we publish the artifacts. And I basically can just go grab Azure deploy.json and Azure deploy.parameters.json. Yep, no. Yep, that looks right, cool. And then the target folder, the way VSTS works is that there's this build.artifact staging directory. So if I copy that in there, then it will automatically appear as a build artifact. So if I save that, I think it's done. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this release definition. It's frustrating how slow this internet is. Makes it very difficult. While we wait for that, so if you're going to kind of get into this, then I guess it's well worthwhile reading up on what's this doing? Oh, I didn't name it. It's called New Release Definition. That's funny. It's well worth reading up on the principles and practices of DevOps and continuous delivery. So, for instance, in terms of continuous delivery, there's 4 main practices, like only build your packages once, which is what we do in the CI when we push out an artifact. Deploy the same way to every environment. Make sure all of your environments are the same, so they're all like production, and smoke test your environments. These sort of things are really easy to do with things like VSTS and the other similar sort of tooling that's out there. So in this case, I've added an Azure Resource Group deployment. I'm going to call the resource group, I had a variable that I was coming up with. So latency conf site dash. Now I'm going to put a variable in here so I can reuse this across development and production. So release.environment name. Location can be Southeast Asia, that's fine. And then it's going to be in a linked artifact. The template file is Azure deploy.json. The template parameters are Azure deploy.parameters.json. And then the template parameter site name, I want to set to that same one with the variable. And that's pretty much all I need to do. At this point, if I run this up on the dev environment, I think that's saved. And in fact, if I clone the dev environment to a new production environment, then I automatically get my deployment pipeline going. The only thing I would do, oops, I accidentally just copied that in there. That I did not want. The only other thing I would do is say production should be a manual deployment, not automatic. So if I save that and then I push up my change, it should all work. Of course, it's possible I got something wrong and it won't work, but I guess you get the idea. The cool thing here is I didn't go into Visual Studio and create a production environment, and I didn't go into the Azure portal and create a production environment, but this will automatically create them for me and then deploy the files into them. So with no touch, I've just created my production environment, and I know 100% that it's exactly the same as my dev environment, because the exact same script with just a different parameter passed in for the site name was used for both of them. And you know, you can add all kinds of things in the parameters, like for instance the VM size. You might want a bigger VM in production to non-production so that it doesn't cost as much, and all of those sorts of things. So you can start getting pretty fancy.
Big round of applause, please. Thanks, Rob.